All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Then if not, we can always post this recording and on LinkedIn and YouTube, of course. So we're going to start our second round of webinar topics on this particular topic of agile methods for developing safety critical airborne software. So I have my esteemed guest here, Krithiga Prasad, and she's from the Excellence Group. And both of she and I have both worked in this environment with developing aerospace software. So it's very familiar and close to our hearts because we face the challenges of trying to build aircraft in airborne software while trying to still maintain a good agile process along the way. So we're going to have some good tidbits to share with you. And this is good. This particular webinar topic is going to go on into the future as well. So we're going to cover one aspect of it today, kind of give you an outline of the areas that we're going to cover, the capability maturity model, DO-178, and how it aligns with agile methodologies. And if you do recall the last webinar that we gave on this topic, we talked about big picture. What are these particular areas of compliance, the capability maturity model, and what it asks for in terms of a process that you must maintain in terms of being a mature organization to even get a contract to build aircraft software. So you need to maintain some compliance level around that, as well as DO-178 is specifically designed for safety critical systems. And so from the entire software development lifecycle, DO-178 gives you guidance that you must maintain to have a robust way of producing aircraft software, especially safety critical systems, so that you have high quality assurance built into it. And then the third area that we covered last time was how do these two areas of compliance align with the agile ways of working? And so as we know, agile is an iterative way of working that is very aligned with the traditional engineering process for maintaining good feedback loops to make sure you're course correcting the direction that you're going. So we know that agile is a highly effective, high quality way of working, but we typically don't see it as aligning with these traditional compliance areas like DO-178 and CMMI, which require a lot of documentation. It seems like there's a lot of big upfront planning, a lot of waterfallish-like ways of working. So how do you merge those two worlds, still trying to be agile, maintaining that iterative way of working, maintaining the value of getting fast feedback and continuous value being produced, still trying to live within these compliance-driven areas like CMMI and DO-178. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Krithiga, and we're going to really focus this particular webinar session, though, on the planning process that both CMMI and DO-178 require for any highly critical, safety critical software. So Krithiga, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Charles. Hey, hello, everyone. We met before for the part one of the session. And you all know me, I'm Krithiga from Excellency Group, and I have 18 plus years of experience in this field, specifically in aerospace and DO-178 and CMMI. And 10 years back, I started bringing Agile into the picture of how it can be merged and still be compliant to CMMI and following the guidelines of DO-178C. So this is my experience of how I made things happen. I'm sharing the best practices, so it could be an informative session for everybody. So this slide shows a brief overview of what CMMI is. It's a model which gives the maturity of how we develop and refine an organization's software development process. And that maturity level goes from 1 to 5. An organization can be 1, 2, by default, they'll be 1, they can be 2, 3, 4, or 5, depending on what process areas we meet. DO-178C is the main pillar which provides the guidance to produce software for airborne system and equipment that perform its intended function with the level of confidence and safety that complies with the airworthiness requirement. If you see the capability maturity model and DO-178C gives you the process areas here and the criticality levels and the guidance here, but would not tell us how it needs to be achieved. It can be achieved in the waterfall way, it can be achieved in the iterative way, agile way. It doesn't specify how one thing needs to be achieved. So it's up to us, the software managers and the organization, to define the methodology to achieve these things. So we can choose the agile methodology as well. Agile is, as we all know, it's a collaborative decision making between requirements and solution teams, and it's an iterative approach. So these two things can very well work with agile methodology, and we are going to take you from one process to the other and show you how it can be made work. Next slide, Charles. Okay. So this slide, the left part is DO-178C, the processes. The first is a software planning process. The next is a software development process. In the software development process, we have the requirements, software requirements process, design, coding and integration process. In the software verification process, we have the reviews, analysis, software testing. And then we have the configuration management, quality assurance, and certification license process. If you see the verification, configuration management, quality assurance, certification license in the DO-178C world is called as an integral process, because it needs to go along the moment you kick off the project. The configuration management, quality assurance, everything should be in place, and we have to follow those processes. And then the moment we start thinking about the requirements, the software verification process should also be thought of. And the moment we kick off the project, the certification license also need to be thought of. So those are called integral processes. And in the center is the agile way. So let's go to the right side and look at the CMMI. I just took the CMMI level 2 as an example, as a basic one. I didn't want to go to level 3, level 4 into complicated one. So level 2 process areas are project planning, measurement and analysis, requirements management, configuration management, project monitoring and control, process and product quality assurance, supplier agreement management. And if you look at the DO-178C flow, and if you look at the CMMI flow, there are a lot of things that we have to think about in the maturity of the organization when we work on these. And the center one is the agile methodology. And here we have release planning, epics, features, user stories, tasks if required. Then we have backlog refinement, estimation, sprint planning. And once we start the sprint, it will be design, build, test. And then we should come up with a potentially shippable increment. And then sprint review, retrospective. And then we go about with our daily stand-ups. So this is just, I want to show a pictorial representation of what are the processes in these and what are the methodologies in Agile we follow. Next slide, Charles. So the DO-178C planning process, first and foremost step for any DO-178C planning process is, of course, this is not a DO-178C training session, but is to understand, analyze the objectives of the planning processes. And example, we need to know what are the development processes, what are the integral processes, which we spoke about. We need to know what are the relationship between these processes, and also feedback mechanism about these processes. If you see DO-178 itself talks about feedback mechanism into these processes, and what is the software lifecycle environment for this, what are the standards we would like to follow, and what would be the software plans, and how we would like to comply with these plans, and how are we going to revision these and develop the software plans. The next is in any DO-178C process area is the activities, and specifically for any effective planning, activity is a determination of how we are going to perform it, right? The first is we have to identify the software plan, provide direction to the people working in the software project, and then we have to know what our standards are, what are the methods and tools that we are choosing for that particular project. And then we have to identify how we are going to coordinate between the software development and integral processes, and ensure the transition criteria from one phase to the other, and what are the external dependencies we have, what are the, if we have going to have a user modifiable software. So these are some of the examples of things that we need to consider in any DO-178C project when we are working on. So first and foremost, we have to analyze the objectives of the project, then planning process, then we need to understand what are the activities need to perform. So once we know the objectives, once we perform the activities to meet the objectives, then the next step is to the output you're generating from those objectives. And in case of planning process, it would be your software plans. And in the DO-178C world, it would be PSAC, SDP, software. PSAC is plan for software aspects of certification. SDP is software development plan. SVP is software verification plan. SCMP is software configuration management plan. And SQAP is software quality assurance plan. So those would be the outputs. Next slide, Charles. Okay, off to Charles.
All right, thanks, Kritika. So yeah, I just wanted to, before we dig a little deeper into the actual requirements of how you would meet CMMI or DO-178, I just wanted to have a level setting slide here about what agile planning looks like at the various levels. So at the highest level, maybe sometimes they call this the onion, the planning onion. You kind of can peel back the layers of the different levels of planning. So at the highest level, you have the vision. And so if you think about a safety critical software project, you typically get an ask from, say a big airline company is asking you to build this software. Your company is contracted to build this particular software module or system, and you get a big list of requirements. You get a requirements document of some sort from the big aircraft company. All right. That document, that ask or that project gets started with some overall vision, some overall system as being identified, major capabilities of the system that are required. And even sometimes, you might even get a requirements document specifically from the actual company about what they want, what they need for this particular system to do. So still yet we identify this initial deliverable that we get from our big aircraft company as a vision and kind of a roadmap of when they need it. The roadmap is defining the milestones, the delivery dates, whatever we contractually have signed up with that aircraft company to deliver to them. We've gotten that kind of contract and the overall project scope identified up front at that point. But in order for us to actually get into the details of how we're going to actually deliver on this, we need to go one level down. And that's kind of where we kick off, which is called the release planning phase of your traditional agile planning onion. And that's kind of where we start to meet the requirements, the compliance requirements of meeting the DO-178 requirements and the CMMI requirements is typically at this level, is at this release planning level. And then, further down into the details like code deliverables, release deliverables, those are kind of all, and change requests. We're going to get to that in a second, or more handled at the iteration and daily planning levels. But in terms of the upfront, typically we call it, in quotes, air quotes, big upfront planning that we typically associate with highly compliant software programs. In Agile, you can handle this big upfront where it's not as big upfront, but still iterative because there's multiple release planning intervals that you go through. But we handle this traditionally what's called big upfront planning at your release planning level. All right. And as you can see, just kind of giving you a pictorial of what that looks like, and Kritika is going to explain more of the details on how you actually meet some of these requirements with release planning. But the overall project vision and scope and the contractual delivery dates, if you will, are captured in this initial vision. And then we produce a high level backlog, product backlog, as we call it in Agile. The product backlog is all the capabilities essentially that we need to deliver on the project. And then the release planning process is going to incrementally show how we get this done over time. Okay, and that contains the details of the actual deliverables over time and the various milestones that we're going to reach over time in terms of the development process is how that evolves. So it's not all big upfront, it's still iterative, but we use the release planning process to break down that big chunk, that big rock of the project scope up front. And so we can iteratively create our compliance documents and update them over time. All right. So Critic, I'll let you turn it over to you then to kind of give a more detailed understanding of how release planning meets these requirements.
Yeah, sure. Just go back to the previous slide. I just add how I did in my previous projects. So ideally, just thinking from the DO 178 and CMMI perspective, what, like Charles said, right, we receive system requirements from a customer saying, hey, this is what needs to be developed. We have a system team, we have a software team, and we are collaboratively working with each other. And the other team might be agile, might not be agile. But let's say, I'm just giving as an example, let's say the software team is agile. So once we get the system requirements, we call it as system aspects of software certification, come up with, okay, what from the system requirements, come up with the requirements verification matrix at a high level I'm talking about, which the system engineer would be doing. And then assigning, okay, out of these system requirements, okay, what all falls under mechanical, electrical, software, some requirements could be both, so that kind of alignment will be obtained. And then we will have discussions with the customer, which very much agile would focus also on customer interaction. So we would discuss with customer and understanding, okay, what is your expectation? We receive the system requirements. And then which we in the agile world can call as scrum of scrums with the system team and other teams to understand what is needed for the software team. So once that is obtained, what I do from, let's say, my software product backlog is take those inputs that I received and put it into my vision for the software perspective. And this can be done at the system perspective also, but since we are focusing more on the software, I would like to take software as an example. So I would put it into my software product backlog and think from the perspective, okay, what is needed from the software side? Okay, these are the requirements that we received that we need to fulfill. Okay, from the DO 178 perspective, we have to, now we got the system requirements, we got the system aspects of software requirements, and then we determine the criticality level of the software, and we need to kick off the software planning process, and then we kick off the project, and then we kick off the release planning. And in the release planning, we add epics, very high level epics of what is needed from my immediate milestone. Okay, I need to do the software planning process for agile, and as a whole, also in any organization, we need to have an overall plan of how things need to be done. In some organization, it could be single plan comprised of all software project, but for DO 178 project, you need to have depending on the level of the software, you need to have a set of plans for your particular software project. So then my epic would be, okay, create a PSAC for this system, and these are the inputs. This is my acceptance criteria. Your acceptance criteria for that epic could be my PSAC reviewed by a peer reviewer or software manager, and moves to the next level of review, or submitting a draft to the customer. I'm just giving as an example. It could be anything that we want, and then go into the agile estimation process. And then in the agile estimation process, we go add, okay, this is the high level, all these plans I need to generate. This is my epic. And how do I go into my features? Okay, these are the features of, and when I'm working on this, the engineers, I myself, I'm talking about, let's say the manager is working on the plans, or some lead is working on the plan. And some engineers can start thinking about, okay, we already received the software requirements. What is the design? What is my development environment I need for this? What is my verification environment I need for this? Because all these details have to be documented in the plans also. So all of these perspectives and all of these thought process can go into your epics, can go into your feature, can go into your user story. And then my product backlog can be built for my first milestone. And a high level release backlog can be built. For example, if I have to deliver a particular label of software, critical flight critical software, or in some terms we call different labels, right? Different colors. So if I have to generate, that will be my end release for that, and my intermediate release will be each of these milestones. So I determined a complete release planning, and I determined my immediate milestone planning, and then from my milestone planning I come into my sprint planning. So pretty much that is what I try to say with this slide, and I just now gave an example of how the thought process can be thought. And when you're thinking in this process, obviously automatically your CMMI thinks a lot of things will be achieved. I have shown that in my example. In the next, we'll go over that. Next slide, Charles. Okay, so whatever I explained in my previous slide, pretty much I just gave the yellow boxes here are just examples of how we need to think about a project, because we have to come out of the mindset of, oh, Agile wouldn't work for aerospace project. No, anything can work for any business that you want. Just you need some tailoring in and out of it, and some add-ons to what is needed to accomplish. So first, as Charles explained, evaluate your product vision. Your product vision can be, if an organization is working on the complete system, it is an entire system for an aircraft, and your part would be a software for that product. So it could be that is your product vision. Then elaborate your product vision into backlog items, like what I explained. Okay, I need to any big aircraft customer, right? We can have PDR, CDR, PPR, and we can also have SOI 1, SOI 2, SOI 3, like that. So determine your complete vision of your product backlog, and determine your milestones that you need to achieve. And then once you determine that, then go add all the epics and all the user stories. And if you have a group of people working on it, let's say 5 to 6 people, so determine the activities, what the developers need to start thinking, what's the verification team needs to start thinking, what the lead need to start thinking, and then coordinate all this and prioritize all of this in your backlog. And then that's my third point: prioritize, create feature, user story, and based on the deliveries. And then set your release goal. My first release goal is to start working on the planning process, and then deliver a draft plan to the customer. To obtain that, I need to do internal reviews of that. And then at the same time, you have to start thinking about receive the requirement verification matrix. So what will fall under your software category? What would be the verification methods of that? So all those goals need to be set. And then you break down into your sprint goals. Okay, what would be sprint 1 goal, 2 goal, 3 goal, like that. And depending on the feedback you achieve, you tailor those goals to what the next sprint would be, and also understand from your retrospective of what it should be. It can be made better. Next slide. Okay, Charles, you want to say something, or I can?
Sure. I'll chime in here. So yeah, this slide is just, wanting to really emphasize. It comes actually from the Scaled Agile website, and being that even though you're in a compliance-driven organization or industry, there's still an opportunity to use Agile methods and have this continuous or iterative approach to meeting compliance requirements. So, we're kind of stuck in a mindset oftentimes that you have to meet these compliance requirements in large batches, right? Or at the end, you do the entire thing at the end. Again, the waterfallish mindset is kind of the way that we think about these things. And we don't typically think that we can do these things iteratively. CMMI nor DO 178, even though they ask for a lot of documents, ask for a lot of compliance areas to be fulfilled, do not dictate how you go about creating those artifacts to show that you've met those compliance requirements. So that's one key point. They're not telling you how you need to go about doing it. And actually, I just want to give a kind of a testament to the reason how I even became an Agilist in the first place is in this particular industry. I was very fed up with the fact that these documents that we were being asked to produce in these, DO 178, for example, that, they're completely artificial documents that we're being asked to produce at certain stages of the waterfall process where they were meaningless. So I'm like, well, why am I going through this time and overhead effort to try and get this document together and try to get it into this final state if it's never going to actually reach that, point until way later in the development life cycle. So let's just have a process that aligns around this idea of how we incrementally and iteratively produce these compliance requirements. And so it's because it's the natural way that we go about evolving a project in the first place. So there's a system here called Lean QMS. And if you're interested, anybody can go to the Scaled Agile website and actually see there's a method and a structure around how certain challenges like this have been solved in the past, and some case studies out there with other companies, large companies that have used an iterative process to meet requirements and compliance, regulatory, security requirements, you name it, on how to do it in an iterative way. So just wanted to really level set this idea about continuous compliance is the best approach, that you just don't do it all in one batch at the end. And as you know, that could get you in trouble. You know, if you try to do it all at the very end, it's probably something that you didn't capture early on. So that's I just want to make sure that we're understanding this process of continuous compliance, that it can be iteratively done versus being done all of it. Because our focus here is planning, right? We're trying to meet the planning requirement. How do we meet the planning requirements of DO 178 and CMMI? Traditionally, you'll say big upfront planning, create a big project plan that captures everything, all to the details and the degree of detail that your traditional project plans might have. But that's not the reality in an agile environment, right? It's iteratively evolves over time. And so that's kind of the way that we work naturally. So it's kind of base our projections, our planning based on reality. And that way we can also produce our documents in the same way based on the actual reality that's happening, and still meet our compliance and regulatory requirements with minimal waste. That's the thing that you're trying to avoid, because if you do things prematurely, you're creating all this big upfront planning prematurely, a lot of that's probably going to go to waste, because that's not the actual evolution of what the project's going to see, down the road. We need to be more iterative and just make the real-time updates as what's needed to kind of follow the plan, the short-term plan, the release plans, the iteration plans that we know. All right, Critic, I'll turn it over to you to get more details around this idea and this concept.
Yeah, sure. So what I did was I took a real example that I have worked on. I didn't mention the project names, and I just gave an example of what artifacts we could give as an example. Take any project for that matter. These artifacts could be a potential evidence or example for the CMMI practice definition. And this practice definition might be from the previous version of the CMMI, but it gives you an idea of all the specific and general goals that is expected out of. How did I try to map this? I took the software planning process of DO 178. I took the project planning process of CMMI, and I took release planning process of Agile, and tried to integrate all of those things and show you. That's pretty much it. So the first one, let me go over one by one. Establish a top, as I explained before. We have the product backlog, where you can add all your work breakdown structure, and then for an overall project, you can input the effort from your product backlog in the Agile tool and come up with a project schedule, which will of course have an overhead time and also other interdependencies. Establish and maintain estimates of the attributes of the work product and task, and the software estimation process in the Agile world, and our story points that should give a high-level estimate. Define the project lifecycle phases upon which to discuss all the phases of the project, and even our PSAC would give us all the phases of the project. And you can define your transition criteria. The transition criteria need not be, this phase should be, my requirements phase should be completely done before I move to the design phase. It can be having a baseline of the requirements and go and providing the draft, and then going into the next design. So it can be thought of as a parallel process, so that can be defined. Estimate the project effort and cost for the work product and task based on the estimated rationale. That's again our software estimation process, your project backlog, and then any additional cost that the project might have, travel, tools, technologies, and all that. Establish and maintain the project's budgets and schedule, sprint backlog, and what it would take for us to accomplish each of the release and other overhead costs. And then your schedule, you can come up with a release schedule and your sprint schedule, and obviously determine the changing factor of it. Every time you get a change request, every time you have an impact, then what would the impact on your cost schedule? Critical for any project planning process and project management process. So we can maintain a PM risk register, and the other day-to-day risk of the project. What we do, we maintain a kind of a sprint planning checklist where we used to make sure, do your user stories have acceptance criteria? Are all stakeholders present here in the meeting? And are there any risk identified at the project level or at the sprint level? And also, apart from that, what we do is, if there is an impediment, not availability of the tool, and there is a dependency of the external stakeholders, or like the Scrum of Scrum between the system and all the other departments, if there is a dependency that's not being answered, that is raised as, oh, I'm sorry. Am I audible, Charles?
Yes, you are. Just continue on, but just let you know something.
Okay. And then any impediments that we raise, if the impediment is not resolved within a day or two, you determine the days, and it goes into the project risk. For example, if you're waiting for a tool, if you're waiting for something from the systems department, you don't get the answer within a couple of days, it automatically becomes project risk. So it's like playing around with the agile tool and what is there, playing around with the agile methodologies and how these things, without being so heavily a part of your sprint, you're part of your daily stand-up. Oh yeah, I have a risk, I didn't get this tool, I didn't this. That gets into the sprint risk, and it goes into the project risk. So things like that. Then plan for management of project data. We identify all of the project data and the tools used for those, like your requirements tool, your configuration, for example, requirement. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's pretty bad. I bet. Yeah, you're really freezing up pretty bad. I could actually take over. Maybe check your network really quick, and then I could continue on I could continue on here because yeah, you're kind of locked, freezing up a little bit.
Okay.
But I could pick up from here. And you left off that plan for management of project data, and so project lifecycle data is documented. That's documented in your software development plan and your software configuration plan, as well as on the last bullet point there, the CMMI practice that's requiring you to plan for necessary resources to perform on the project. That'd be captured in your PSAC. So as you can see here, we actually, did a lot of work for you here. If you're going to bring this back to your company, you actually have a kind of a traceability here on how you actually could meet some of these CMMI requirements and the evidences that you have produced and the documents that align to these various practices. So one thing too, in in a software configuration plan, a software development plan, in your DO 178, it points to the certain categories that you need to have within those plans. So again, how to create those plans are dictated by DO 178, but just showing you the mapping that satisfies these areas in CMMI actually meet those requirements as well. Krithiga, you want to try it again and maybe pick up on
Can you hear me now? How is it now?
Yep, it's pretty clear. Yep, go ahead.
I'm very close to the router. No.
Actually,
okay, this is the kind of.
You still have a big delay in your audio. maybe give it one more try. If it doesn't work this time, no worries. I can pick it up from here, but maybe try it one more time.
Is it okay now?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I think there's still a big delay. There's a possibility that you might freeze. Why don't you give it a try?
How is it now?
If not,
Can you
I'll
hear
stop for you. Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. So basically, it is whatever example.
Hey, Krithiga, maybe turn off your video, and then I think that'll do it. If you turn off your video, maybe that'll alleviate some of your bandwidth. All right.
Is it good now?
Yep.
How is it?
I can hear you. Yep. Go ahead.
Okay. So basically what the matrix shown here is whatever the methodology we have, whatever tool we have, how do we utilize it, implement it to obtain or comply what is required for the project, be it D178 or CMMI. So some of the techniques that I have used is coming up with a sprint planning checklist, coming up with a sprint review checklist, so that we don't miss of thinking about the risk, the impediments, and also obtaining the commitment from the stakeholders. So all perspectives of the sprint and the backlog is thought about. And also the first one, plan for knowledge and skill needed to perform the project. What we ask is at every sprint meeting, do we have enough resources? Does the resource have enough skill set to perform the task? So that is added part of the sprint checklist. Plan the involvement of identified stakeholders. This is documented in the PSAC, who the stakeholders are, who the project team members would be. And also we ensure in our sprint meeting and in our Scrum of Scrum, all stakeholders are available so that we can obtain periodic feedback and not obtain feedback after we delivered something or after we have done with a particular milestone, so that it makes our iterative process much better. And the next one is establish and maintain your overall project plan content. And of course, our Agile tool or the Agile process does a lot of scheduling, burn down, release details, and software plans for DO178 PSAC, SDP does that work. Review all the plans, and that's a CMMI requirement. And of course, we have plan review process for DO178, and that can be incorporated in your Agile. Reconcile the project plan to reflect available and estimated resource. So as explained to you before, and every sprint, we ask this question about the resources and who's available, what is the capacity for this particular sprint, and we will revisit that. Obtain commitment from stakeholders. Stakeholders commitment, as I explained, is obtained during our release planning and sprint planning. And establish and maintain an organizational policy, like Charles explained, in addition to the sprint and in addition to the plans generated for DO178 or the processes, we need to have an organizational QMS and the processes associated to ensure following the processes and making sure we are generating what is required for the organization. And then establish and maintain the plan for performing the project planning process. And that's exactly what we've been discussing so far. It's a software planning process. Next slide, Charles.
All right. You go.
Yeah. Do you want to go with configuration management or pause between for Q&A?
Yeah, one more slide, actually. So we're going to say configuration management for our next webinar in this series. So it's goes in pretty much in depth into a lot of those topics. But one thing that we do want to end on before we open it up for Q&A is just to kind of revisit what are the key Agile artifacts that capture all of those areas that Krithiga just went through with CMMI and DO178. So a lot of the planning requirements are captured in the release identification through the release planning process. So the team increments and what those iteration goals and those goals for each iteration that are going to be accomplished throughout the course of a release plan. So that is a key artifact. The definition of done is a highly valuable artifact. And you can see I even have that highlighted in green, because a lot of the detailed quality requirements, so down to the code level quality requirements like code reviews and things of that nature, you can capture those in your definition of done artifacts at the story level, at the release level, even at the epic level. There's certain definition of done requirements for, like Krithiga mentioned, that there's certain epics, having a PSAC, what does that mean when it's done? What do we need to have in place for that? So definition of done at the various levels are essentially ultimately become your quality checklist that can be audited along the way as artifacts that you've met these requirements throughout. And then your standard Agile artifacts that everyone should be familiar with: epics, features, user stories, tasks, the test cases that align with the acceptance criteria, the test results themselves, as well as the bugs and the defects that get captured throughout the testing process. So all of these artifacts need to be managed, in an Agile tracking system of your liking. Could be Jira, Azure DevOps, Rally, whatever tool that you use are flexible tools to use to capture all the compliance requirements in these artifacts. Accommodating change. So a big part of DO 178, critical software development is managing change. How are we tracking change? That is handled through your sprint cycles. It's fortunate that sprint cycles are only 2 weeks, so we have a feedback loop there. But even at our daily stand-ups, every single day, there's an opportunity to identify and capture any type of change that might be needed. And then we officially need to document that, like in a change management system, change control system. There's a process around that, which could ultimately end up being a bug or a new story on your backlog. Whatever the case may be, that change can turn it into an actual artifact, a traditional Agile artifacts in any of those areas. It could be a task, again, a new user story, a bug, or the whatever the case may be, however you choose to use those artifacts in your change management system. And then lastly, the software demos that happen at various levels and stages within Agile development, either at the team level or maybe even at the system level, system verification, system demo level, that these are ways to actually cross-check your project management plan, your progress that you're making on hitting certain key milestones of software actually being, completed and ready for integration testing, or maybe ready for even release. But these software demos are your true checkpoints to making sure that you're meeting these project milestones. And then obviously opportunities to actually collect feedback along the way. All right. So with that said, we're going to move into our Q&A portion of the call. We're right at about 15 minutes too. So any Q&A opportunities here from our audience around what we just covered today? So again, kind of the topic that we covered today is the DO 178 and the CMMI planning requirements, and how do you mesh that with an Agile planning process. And then again, we're going to kind of go on to future topics. You can see configuration management is probably our next topic in this series. But in terms of planning, any Q&A?
I see a question from Sandeep. First of all, excellent session. Thank you, Sandeep. Question is, what type of roles do you have or recommend in this process? Do you retain the Agile roles, such as product owner, Scrum Master, developer, or do you tailor them to keep a balance between traditional and Agile approach? Actually, we can maintain the same role, Sandeep, because that clears, for example, product owner can be your point of contact when you have system aspects of safety requirements. He can work with the system engineer and understand the product and obtain the product backlog. That can be done by the product owner, just in a different project, DO 178 or aerospace software project. It can be done by him, and Scrum Master can still facilitate all the ceremonies. Just that to aid the Scrum Master, to aid the product owner, just few methods and few templates and few trainings, would help. Other than that, we can definitely maintain the same roles.
Well, one thing I'd like to add to that too, Krithiga, is that I think we got maybe a similar experience in this, is that your Scrum Master actually becomes a critical, plays a critical role in the software quality assurance aspects of this, and making sure that the team and the program meets these the compliance requirements. So those traditional Agile you know, I think somebody needs to go on mute. Real quick. Okay. So your traditional software project, your traditional agile process that your Scrum Master usually makes sure that we're following and meeting the guidelines of a good agile process. Now this process needs to be aligned with making sure that we meet these compliance and regulatory requirements. All right, so your Scrum Master kind of plays a role in making sure that happens. And so if you have a quality assurance organization that's on top of this, that the Scrum Master can work with, otherwise you can just cut out the middleman and have your Scrum Master be up to speed on what these requirements are, and so that they're really driving the project and the program to meet these requirements as well. All right. Taylor, yep, exactly. Another question, Krithiga, how do you convince a more traditionally driven management or leadership team to accept or adopt the agile approaches for Medtronic systems development? Can you please share your learnings? So you got a specific
definitely.
example.
Actually, sure. My company also was the company that I worked for earlier. If you see all the companies who've been doing software or product for years together, right? They have been used to a particular way of approach, and and anything change would people any company might not like, because they are more having more conservative approach. So it's like introducing the change without making an huge impact to the organization is what I started following. For example, it is called Scrum of Scrums, but it is pretty much a meeting with the other department to understand their priorities and your priorities, and making sure it is aligned. In the traditional way, they might call it project status meeting. In the agile way, it could be Scrum of Scrums. In fact, if you see, when you start introducing these small changes and you bring in stakeholder involvement and organizational leaders involvement, they would seriously appreciate, because you are having this transparency of telling what issues you have, what impediments you have, what risks you see, and also giving them a visibility of burn down of what can be accomplished, what cannot be accomplished. In fact, customer would also like it, because you are in frequent interactions with customer on any criticality question, be it, or any deliveries, be it, or even when you're doing PPR, SOI. In my agile way, I even do a pre-review, a pre-audit of things, and I have shown to the customer my pre-review findings and how I have. They appreciate all this. Actually, when you say, hey, I'm going to change this entire thing and I'm going to take you to a new approach, they would not be. But when you slowly introduce these things and slowly get them used to it, and then slowly train it, and that's my approach. My work with them and make them understand what you're doing, transparency, and that in fact worked even with the customer, I would say.
Yeah, one thing I could add to that too, Krithiga, is what I found is that the approach that I use, in this actual example in the aerospace world, the approach that I used was that the agile way is a lot lighter weight than your traditional waterfall approach, because your traditional compliance-driven organization that requires, like in your case, a lot of medical devices, same thing, a lot of documents. If you're doing big upfront planning and waterfallish planning, you have to produce, you're probably producing all these documents in a way that do not align with the reality, like I explained earlier, the reality of how the work is actually evolving. And so there's a lot of waste, and that's why it's painful in these environments to go through this compliance exercise of creating all these documents just for the sake of creating all these documents, when you're not going to really kind of solidify these documents until way later on down the road. So let's do it in the more rational, sensible way, is let's update the documents when we have the relevant information to update the documents with. So let's do it iteratively, which means that there's a lot of stuff that we don't have to do right now because we don't have the information to do that. And so when you communicate it to your leadership that way, they're like, oh, we get out of doing a lot of work up front. We could just actually get to doing the actual work. And so it kind of, lifts the load. The only thing that they might actually push back on too is the amount of meetings. Agile is, traditionally more meetings, more feedback opportunities. So they see that as a pain, right? We already got too many meetings, and you're adding us to have a whole bunch of more meetings to talk about things. So that's the maybe the only pushback, but there's some give and take, right? So we're not going to allow you to do a lot of wasteful administrative overhead work and documents just, for the sake of going through exercise, but we are going to ask for your feedback. We're going to keep these meetings short and sweet, to the point, and we're not going to waste your time, but we're going to try to make them valuable so we can synchronize on things and to get feedback, because we're not asking for a lot of overhead stuff like we used to before. So that's the kind of the give and take. But I think they typically get it, because that's how you normally would go about doing things anyway, in an agile way. It's just that there never traditionally was a process that they were familiar with that was structured enough to kind of lead them through this iterative process. But if you got a good structure to it, and you can show them the value of the lightweight, I think they see the benefit.
And Sandeep, yes, to your point, we need a lot of patience and to make any change, but it is definitely doable. And take one step at a time, and take a project and take the project towards the change, and people see the changes and successes when it comes along. And if you want any help in particular for your project, or anything in particular for mechatronics or something, our contacts are available in the slide. You can reach us offline, and we can help you particularly for what your customized request, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Any other comments, questions about what we talked about? Yep, your slide deck and recording usually goes out, and you'll see that in a couple of days. But yeah, if nothing else, we'll go ahead and end it. Sure, audience, anybody has anything that you guys want to ask us? And again, these sessions will continue. You see, we just covered one part of the compliance process, which is the planning process, but we soon have, configuration management, development, verification, validation, and, all these areas that are going to be coming. That we're going to show you some, basically what Krithiga just went over with you is essentially how you can manage your entire safety critical software systems process. I mean, we have it all mapped out for you, and it's awesome. So a lot of things that you see there is coming from actual projects. So definitely going to share some more valuable tools with you next time. Go ahead. Last question. Go ahead.
Do you recommend any tools, Jira, Workma? How do you recommend doing road mapping? Actually, every tool can be made to work for your needs, because in my experience, right, I have used several tools. I've used target process. That is one of the reason I removed all the tool names when I wanted to show you. Any tools can be made to work. I have worked with target process. I have worked with Jira. I have worked with Azure DevOps. So any tools can do the work for you. And yeah, there are tools that I wanted to cover that in the next session, probably. The thing is how to map different tools together, because sometimes at a high level, there would be organizational roadmap tools. And then how do you take that organizational roadmap tools into, let's say the system team uses a system roadmap tool, and then into software, and then how to take it forward to your configuration management tool, test tool, and the result. So yeah, definitely many tools right now are widely integrated, or there are plugins available which can be integrated, or there would be some additional works that need to be done for the integration. But yes, it can be done, and we can take some examples and work on it in the next session.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for attending. Again, look forward for you attending our next session. So kind of keep an eye on our webinar calendar. I don't think it'll be next month, but it's definitely in the coming webinar sessions. But yeah, reach out to Krithiga or I, and we'll have our contact information available to you and send out to you directly for those that attended this webinar. All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys so much. Have a great day, rest of your day, and see you next time.
Thank you.